When I bought my place up on Falcon Peak, a small, rocky slice of heaven, I did it for three simple, non-negotiable reasons: solitude, science, and the view, nothing else. After 20 years of geological consulting in high-stress, high-rise Denver, I needed the quiet. I needed a place where the biggest variable was the weather, not corporate politics. No HOA rules, no mandatory decor, just the raw, breathtaking Colorado wilderness and a profound, measurable silence. So, when the Pinnacle Crest HOA, that meticulously planned, aggressively manicured, white picket kingdom sprawled out below me, started sniffing around, I knew I was in for a fight that went beyond property lines. They looked at my parcel, the one rogue patch of land not under their jurisdiction, like I was a cancerous growth on their perfect aesthetic. My name is Jake Harding. I'm 42, a professional geologist who specializes in slope stability and subsurface erosion, and I live on the one piece of property in a 5-mile radius that doesn't answer to the almighty homeowners association. I bought it clean, fair, and with every exemption nailed down tighter than a museum artifact. Their houses sit neat and identical, lined up like little stacks of unnerving sugar cubes on a shelf. Mine looks like it crash-landed from Mars, built from reclaimed wood and rough stone, and I was absolutely committed to maintaining that fiercely independent, extraterrestrial vibe. For 4 years, the letters trickled in, suggesting, then encouraging, then outright begging me to join the community, which, translated from HOA speak, meant, submit your soul, your lifestyle, and your architectural freedom to our petty, beige dictatorship. I always declined. Sometimes with a dry, humorous note about my preference for igneous rocks over lawn gnomes, sometimes with a formal, 5-page legal declaration citing my established non-conforming use status. But the real, soul-crushing trouble started after I refused to sell them a slim wedge of my property, just a narrow, inconvenient strip along the ridge. That wedge, apparently, was strategic. According to the HOA president, Brenda Sterling, a woman whose personality was as rigid and brittle as dry clay. If they had that slice, they could build a multi-tiered public center for scenic enjoyment. She called it a Pinnacle Vista Pavilion. It sounded lovely, right? A place for the community to gather. In reality, it was going to be a giant concrete monstrosity, a monument to communal vanity and Brenda's fragile ego, set to sit right beneath my southern windows. The sweeping, soul-cleansing view of the valley gone, replaced forever with picnic tables, the high-pitched, incessant soundtrack of screaming toddlers, and mandatory HOA potlucks. I told her no. Politely, firmly, legally. The conversation ended with her staring at my house, a look of pure, unadulterated entitlement hardening her face. I even had my lawyer send a formal notice of refusal, citing my property rights and the specific zoning protections for my land. So they pivoted. When dealing with an HOA, never assume a no is the final answer. It's just the opening salvo. I came home one Tuesday evening to find survey markers hugging my property line like aggressive ticks. Bright orange plastic flags dancing mockingly in the wind like little fluorescent middle fingers. Brenda didn't even bother to notify me personally. The first I heard was a cheap, glossy newsletter stuck illegally in my mailbox, violating federal code, by the way, announcing their grand new venture, the Falcon Ridge Cultural Center. Designed to harmonize with nature. I nearly choked on my artisanal coffee and felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I drove straight down to the HOA office, a temporary trailer that looked exactly as flimsy and structurally unstable as their planning skills, and asked for Brenda. She emerged wearing a jacket the color of stale salmon, sunglasses that screamed suburban warlord, and that tight, Botoxed, shark-like smile I'd come to recognize. "Jake," she chirped, "they sound grating. It's so refreshing to see you finally taking an interest in community development. Maybe you can contribute your earthy insights." I cut her off. I had a folder ready, a detailed, color-coded geological survey of the ridge. I'd done the work myself to be triple sure, but any first-year geo student could have told her this. The soil on that slope was highly unconsolidated, poorly bonded, and the underlying bedrock fractured at a high angle. It was absolutely, positively unsuitable for heavy construction without serious, prohibitively costly reinforcement. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm, leveled, and direct, like I was reading a death sentence from a scientific journal. This ridge is unstable. The erosion patterns alone should terrify you. You try to pour a multi-story concrete structure here without deep stabilization, and that entire hillside will fail. We're talking millions in damage, human lives at risk, and you're pinning this whole damn thing less than 20 feet from my border. She barely glanced at the report, flipping through the technical cross-sections with the scientific comprehension of a houseplant. Jake, with all due respect, she said, tapping the corner of the report with a perfectly manicured nail. We've had our own assessments done by our professionals. This is just scaremongering. I asked for a copy of her assessment. She laughed, a tight, metallic sound that offered zero warmth. It's internal, darling. Proprietary. Right. I followed up in writing. Sent them certified letters with everything. The detailed maps, the quantitative risk analyses, historical photographs of previous minor slides that had happened long before any of their little boxes appeared. No response. I felt a sense of dread, knowing I had exhausted all reasonable avenues. 2 weeks later, the dread became reality. I was woken up before dawn by the percussive sound of jackhammers vibrating through the very ground my house sat on. They were pouring the foundation. From my deck, I watched the construction circus unfold. Cranes, cement mixers, workmen hauling massive steel beams to the very edge of a slope I knew couldn't hold them without serious retaining infrastructure. It was truly surreal, like watching toddlers deliberately build a Jenga tower on a waterbed. The worst part was that it was all happening less than 20 feet from my living room window, directly infringing on my personal space and my view. They installed temporary fencing that neatly, aggressively bisected the line of my panoramic view. Some of their delivery trucks started parking partially on my gravel turnout, forcing me to maneuver around them just to get to my mailbox. Bold, entitled, and utterly predictable. When I tried to speak with the site foreman, a stressed-looking guy named Leo, he just shrugged, avoided eye contact, and handed me a business card for Sterling Planning LLC, which, of course, was owned by Brenda's nephew, Chad Sterling. Just a tight little family operation, ensuring no pesky outside interference. I attended the next HOA meeting, uninvited. The room was stuffy and smelled like stale potpourri and resentment. When I stood up to speak, holding their stack of unopened return to sender warning envelopes, they literally chuckled. The board members exchanged knowing glances. One particularly smug guy made a crack about me being a geological chicken little. Brenda leaned into the microphone, adjusted her salmon blazer, and delivered the ultimate mic drop, that cold, shark-like smile firmly in place. If Jake won't be part of the community, she announced to the enthusiastically applauding audience, he'll just have to watch us improve around him. I walked out immediately, not wanting to stay for the next round of smugness and cheap lemonade. But that night, I sat on my porch, poured a glass of bourbon, and watched the moonlight creep over the fresh concrete pads below. They were building their monument to spite, their legacy, and they had absolutely no idea it was already standing on a fault line of their own making. Watching this disaster being built in real time was deeply, profoundly unsettling. The daily clang of steel and the grind of machines echoed up the bluff like an alarm clock engineered in hell. From my kitchen window, I could see the scaffoldings creeping closer to the property line, like termites chewing at the edge of my sanity and my privacy. What made it worse was the certainty that they were doing this, not out of any genuine community need, but purely out of vindictive spite, because I had dared to say no. The construction site quickly transformed from a simple vista point into Brenda's Bluffside Legacy Pavilion, a full-fledged ego project. I'd see Brenda strutting around in a hard hat that definitely still had the price tag attached, barking directives she clearly didn't comprehend to the contractors. They were preparing for the damn Olympics. I overheard one worker ask if there'd be concerts. Another said rumors were flying about a high-end wine-tasting terrace. Because nothing screams community like sipping expensive Pinot Noir next to a major, documented landslide zone, right? I wasn't idle, though. I filed an official complaint with the county's engineering department, complete with my original analysis and an addendum outlining their reckless progress, flagging it as an urgent geotechnical concern. A week later, I got the expected generic, "Thank you for your civic awareness" form letter. Bureaucracy at its most inert, doing what it does best, nothing. So, I dug deeper. I called in a few colleagues from my consulting days in Denver, real slope stability engineers, people who understood the critical importance of the angle of repose. I paid them handsomely to review my data, and every single one came back with the same appalled sentiment. What the hell are they doing? This is professional negligence. Meanwhile, the petty harassment continued. Trucks continued to block my driveway. I once found 2 massive, palletized bags of quick-setting cement leaning against my wooden fence. Not even out of malice, I think, just pure, entitled carelessness, as if my property was simply an extension of their construction staging area. I photographed every infraction, documenting every inch of their creep, knowing these receipts would matter later. I tried to talk to the county inspector during one of his rare site visits. He was a kid, maybe 25, clipboard in hand, with that nervous smile that clearly says, "Please don't ask me any real questions that require thought." I pointed out the fault zone proximity and asked if he'd reviewed the slope stabilization report. He looked completely lost. "I'm just here to check that the fencing complies with section B.8.2.2. He stammered, tapping his paper. Of course. Safety first, right? Fences before foundational integrity. Then came the legacy celebration update meeting. It was held under a white tent at the edge of the site, with folding chairs and a speaker system like they were launching a tech startup. Brenda opened the event with the fervor of a televangelist. "We are building a legacy," she declared. "This project will elevate Pinnacle Crest and serve generations to come." When I stepped up during the Q&A and asked, with surgical precision, whether the HOA had filed a complete environmental impact report, EIR, Brenda ignored me completely. She handed the mic to her nephew, Chad Sterling, who mumbled vaguely about private compliance verification protocols and pointed to a slideshow of 3D models that looked like they'd been rendered on a Nintendo 64. That's when I deployed my tactical weapon. I dropped a thick, printed copy of the state revised slope development statutes on their podium. Section 12, paragraph 4. All developments within 500 feet of documented erosion zones require an EIR, approved and reviewed by a certified agency. They didn't have it. I knew they didn't. Brenda's smile didn't drop, but her eyes went cold. "Thank you, Jake," she said, the deadpan tone cutting through the tense silence. "Your input has been noted." They immediately pivoted to the next question about the color of the terrace umbrellas. That night, I sent more packets, certified, notarized, to the County Planning Commission and included the statute violation. Then I started combing through permit records and city council approvals, specifically looking for the sign-off on the environmental waiver. That's when I noticed the signature of Councilman Victor Vance, a familiar face. Vance, who I'd seen sipping expensive Merlot at Brenda's 4th of July party last year, looking like he owned the entire canyon. Suddenly, the pattern was clear. Vance's office had been aggressively fast-tracking HOA projects, none of which had been flagged for the mandatory environmental review. This wasn't just incompetence, it was corruption. I filed a Freedom of Information request for any and all correspondence between Pinnacle Crest HOA and Victor Vance over the past 18 months. It would take time, but I had a hunch, and Brenda was still pouring concrete like she had a deadline from God. The next morning, watching them install steel beams, I finished calculating the cost of their mistake. I knew exactly who was going to pay for it. Then it started raining. Not the light, polite kind that just waters the garden. This was the Colorado high country's biblical vengeance. Sheets of cold, relentless water slamming into the bluff like the earth was collecting a debt. It came down for days, then a momentary break, then more rain, harder, longer. The kind of saturation that makes the massive ponderosa pines lean a little too far, and the earth start whispering and shifting beneath your boots. I was watching the slope. Like a hawk, my soil moisture sensors, which I had buried weeks before, tracked the numbers rising to historic critical saturation levels, levels not seen in 2 decades. And right there, perched precariously on the very edge of the saturated earth, stood Brenda's monument to civic delusion. The pavilion skeleton was complete. 2 massive terraces jutted from the hillside like the cantilevered deck of a cruise ship. Beneath them, the massive concrete base for a future underground parking structure, poured in spite of every red flag I'd waved. Decorative pavers were stacked in neat rows, waiting to become walking paths over what was, geologically speaking, a ticking time bomb. I tried one last, desperate time. I sent the HOA and the City Council a final report, signed by 2 licensed engineers and myself. It spelled it out in plain English, using the kind of language a layperson could not possibly misinterpret. Shear stress, lateral force, subsurface slippage. I even color-coded the diagrams for easy reading, using bright red for high risk. Brenda and Vance ignored it completely, proving they were not just negligent, but actively reckless. Then one morning, the bluff moved. It started just before 6 a.m. A low, guttural rumble that was easy to mistake for distant, heavy machinery, but my sensors caught the P-wave tremor. And then I felt it. A vibration, short, sharp, and deeply unnatural, running right through the foundation of my house. I stepped onto my porch. The first thing I saw was a crack, thin but rapidly widening, splitting the newly laid pavement below like an enormous zipper opening the earth. Then came the slide. 60 meters of bluff face, completely soaked and terminally weakened, let go in a single, catastrophic, heaving motion. It was almost graceful in its destruction. Trees leaned and tipped forward like soldiers falling in slow motion. The earth groaned, split wide open, and surged forward, carrying with it those 2 massive, freshly built terraces. Their supports snapped like dry spaghetti. The thick, rigid concrete fractured like plate glass under pressure. A large section of the underground parking structure collapsed into itself, water gushing through broken rebar like it had waited centuries for this moment. The noise was deafening, a mixture of grinding earth, snapping wood, and exploding concrete. The dust cloud shot upward like a geyser, obscuring the valley. And then, silence. Absolute, heavy, terrifying silence. I ran inside and called emergency services, reporting a structural collapse and possible entrapments. Then, the most crucial part, I sent a direct email to every single news contact I had. Photos, GPS data, the live moisture readings, every time-stamped warning. I documented the hell out of the collapse before they could possibly spin it, blame the rain, or blame the inherent nature of gravity. Within an hour, police and fire crews had taped off the area. Residents came pouring out of their houses in robes and umbrellas, staring down at the ruined slope with a kind of stunned, dumbfounded awe. 3 homes had taken massive hits. One had its entire front deck torn away. Another had foundational damage visible from the street. The damage report came in that afternoon. Over $15 million in projected losses, not including the astronomical cost of ongoing hazard mitigation. Brenda, to her credit, didn't show her face. Chad Sterling was on site, though, pale as printer paper, trying desperately to instruct a seasoned fire captain on where they could and couldn't stand. The captain, a man who had clearly seen too much to tolerate Chad's nonsense, told him to sit down and shut up, or leave in handcuffs. The real hammer dropped later that week. Pinnacle Crest's insurance provider issued a chilling public statement. After reviewing the evidence, specifically, the extensive prior warnings and documented risks provided by Mr. Jake Harding, independent geological consultant, the insurer was invoking the known risk exclusion clause. In plain terms, no payout. Not a single cent. They wouldn't cover a dime because the HOA leadership had been formally warned in writing and proceeded anyway, making the disaster an act of professional negligence, not an act of God. The local paper ran the damning headline. Geologist warned HOA. They didn't listen. Now it's a mudbath. I knew the next move wouldn't be an apology. It would be blame. And I was more than ready. The blame came via certified letter, delivered by a tight-lipped courier. The HOA was formally accusing me of causing the landslide with an unauthorized water drainage system that allegedly redirected runoff toward their construction site. This wasn't just a slapback. This was a desperate, malicious attempt to flip the script entirely and pin their $15 million disaster on the guy who tried to save them. Within the week, I received notice of a civil complaint requesting a temporary injunction and access to survey my land. Chad Sterling's name was on the documents, along with a high-powered law firm out of Denver that specialized in vicious HOA litigation. Slick website, absolutely no morals. But I didn't panic. Panic is for amateurs. I called my lawyer and immediately hired a private geotechnical firm from Boulder, a dedicated, independent expert witness team, to fight their junk science with undeniable, third-party facts, sensors, and LiDAR mapping. I also reached out to Senior County Inspector Alonzo Reyes, a serious man who wore his badge like a shield against nonsense. Reyes walked my land personally, examining the elevation gradients and sediment patterns. After reviewing the untouched soil, he confirmed, with a grunt of professional disgust, "This ground hasn't been touched in years." Drainage? My ass. The Boulder firm's report returned first, clean as a whistle. No drainage, no tampering. It showed the failure originated directly beneath the concrete platform, stating the destabilization was caused by excessive structural load placed on an unconsolidated and unreinforced slope. They built like idiots, and gravity simply performed its mandated function. Inspector Reyes's official report followed. No evidence of external influence. HOA proceeded despite credible warnings. Documented negligence. Boom. My attorney filed for full dismissal and a devastating counterclaim for harassment and reputational damage. A court date was set for me, Chad, and Brenda to testify. Then came the anonymous manila envelope. No return address, just a stack of printed, internal emails. The correspondence showed Brenda asking Vance to expedite a zoning review, which he did under a flimsy, small structure exemption. Chad referred to keeping the environmental stuff quiet. The kicker was Brenda gloating that my geology obsession wouldn't matter because we've got the votes. I handed the entire stack to my attorney. The fight was over. It was just a matter of execution now. The HOA started to crack internally. Forum posts quickly shifted from blaming me to questioning Brenda's dictatorial protocol. I fueled the revolt by giving everything. The reports, the leaked emails, the drone footage of Chad skulking around my property, to a trusted producer at Channel 7 News. They wanted a live, follow-up segment. Brenda agreed to an interview, planning one last attempt to spin the story. I watched the broadcast from home, feeling a calm certainty. She talked about acts of God, until the anchor, sharp and methodical, presented the leaked emails and live drone footage of the ongoing erosion beneath the remaining section of the terrace. Brenda visibly cracked under the heat, her face seizing up. She snapped, sputtering, "Victor approved it all. I didn't sneak anything through. He said the waiver didn't need the full process." She had thrown a sitting councilman under the bus on live television, accidentally confessing to the entire conspiracy. The room went silent. The next morning, headlines screamed, "HOA president blames councilman on live TV." They were collapsing from the inside, exactly as I predicted. The courtroom was literally cold. Brenda was there, defiant but exhausted. Chad was twitchy and miserable. Victor Vance entered last. His politician's smugness completely evaporated. The case covered fraud, document falsification, and reckless endangerment. My part was simple: testify to the facts, the data, and the receipts. When their lawyer implied a vendetta, I replied, "My vendetta is against bad engineering. Everything else is just gravity doing its job." The evidence was overwhelming, and the live broadcast of Brenda's confession was played twice. The verdicts came in within a week. Brenda received 18 months in county jail and was barred from holding public office for 10 years. Vance received 2 years probation, a hefty fine, and a forced resignation. Chad lost his contractor's license. The HOA's remaining $3.1 million was split for restitution and state-mandated land restoration. I received $185,000 for damages, mostly covering my legal and consulting fees. A month later, the wreckage was gone, replaced by quiet, protected grass. A small sign appeared on my property line, hammered in by an unknown person, a final, silent salute. It read, "I warned you." I didn't put it there, but I left it up. Now, the quiet is back, the view is back. The only monument left on the ridge is a silent, protected patch of native grasses, the ultimate, permanent victory over bad engineering and worse neighbors.